Good evening, people. It's Brett Redman here, Bad Intentions Boxing. I'm back for another interview. I've got Andy Clarke, Sky Sports presenter, commentator and analyst with me. Andy, fantastic to have you with us. How are you keeping?
Good, thanks. Yeah, can't complain. You?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I think the night's setting in a little bit, so I'll be ready, upset to go tomorrow. Not too bad. Thank you very much, though. Let's start. One of the questions I think that I've always wondered, and whenever I've sat and I've watched TV, is how did you get started in journalism to end up where you are today?
So I started 20 years ago, 21 years ago now, and things were different then because journalism degrees weren't really so much of a thing at that point. You could do one, but the ones that people really respected were a postgrad from City, either in broadcast or print or Cardiff. Other than that, media degrees didn't really hold too much sway, to be honest. So I didn't do one. And when I left university, I didn't really have too clear an idea of what I wanted to do, because at that point, people would leave university without any kind of career plan. That was quite normal. Now it's not. You're under a lot of pressure to get a job. I think I think the world's a more difficult place now for graduates and just for young people in general, to be honest. And so I left and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I took some time out, moved down to London with a couple of mates, and just had a good think about what it was that I would enjoy. And I'd done a degree that I enjoyed. So the idea of doing a job that I didn't enjoy was just not really something I was willing to entertain. And I love sport. I'd always loved sport. I played it since I could walk. I followed it avidly from the same age. And, you know, I wasn't kind of like shy when it came to public speaking and things like that. So that's why I decided on it, really. And I thought broadcast would suit me better than print. So I wrote a lot of letters. I think the kind of way into the industry is not really that different now than it was then, other than I think qualifications now do mean more, and maybe you do really need one to get that foot in. But then it was about making phone calls and sending letters. I mean, email was around, but, you know, I wasn't really on it. So you just got in touch with people whichever way you could and kind of introduced yourself and tried to sell yourself and get a foot in the door. And I got a few replies. I got one from Capital. Capital Sport at the time was massive. People wouldn't really realise now, if they're under the age of 25, they probably wouldn't really remember Capital when it was big, because it really was big. London Live was another one, so that's BBC London. Talk Sport, who just relaunched from Talk Radio. They were the main three who kind of showed a bit of interest, and I went in and did some work experience with all of them. And Talk Sport was the one that worked out, because they offered me to come in permanently on expenses, so not really paid. I think I was on 20 quid a day, and I thought that was a result, because I was expecting to have to work for absolutely nothing for however long. I don't think that's an ideal system. I mean, I understand why they do it, because it does separate out who wants to do it from who kind of just fancies it, but it also excludes people who can't afford to do it, which I think is really bad. But there's plenty of industries with that kind of problem. So I just got in at TalkSport and took it from there. And it was a great place to be, because it was new, and it was kind of fairly disorganized, I would say. We didn't really have any rights for anything. There weren't that many people there, but if you had some initiative and you had a bit of courage, then you got to do things quickly there, which was definitely the case for me. And it was really fun. It was an enormous amount of fun. I couldn't really have asked for anywhere better. I guess I might have got a more traditional broadcast schooling if I'd come through a BBC station, but in a kind of journalism sense, I think I got one of the last old-fashioned tabloid kind of educations in it, in a sense, because Kelvin Mackenzie ran the station at that point, and his old son lieutenants were there with him, most of them. And in a way, it wasn't ideal, because they were print guys and this was broadcast, but just their mindset of what you needed to do and the attitude you needed to have to get on was quite a valuable one, I think. You know, you were expected to graft, and you were expected to. The answer to every question you were asked about, you know, availability for work was yes. That was the only acceptable answer. And I'd see people get asked, you know, do you want to go? Can you come in on Sunday at 6 o'clock in the morning? and like cover the London Marathon or help like make the tea for the people who are covering the London Marathon. And you see someone say no to that, and you see the person who asked them, their eyes would just go dead, you know, and you just, I'm having fun a little bit here, but you could just see that to that person they had asked, they were dead to them then, because they'd given the wrong answer. But I was happy to do it. I was happy to work 24 hours a day. It was great. I loved it.
So I think it sounds like there was a lot of graft that was involved in that, and a lot of probably give that was more than take.
Yeah, maybe, but it was where I wanted to be. You know, it was what I wanted to do, and when you're chasing something like that, it does seem like a bit of a pipe dream. I remember telling mates that that's what I was going to do, and some of them were a bit kind of skeptical. You know, they were just thinking, yeah, of course, mate. Like, you know, loads of people want to do that. Come on, be realistic, that kind of thing. But I thought to myself, well, people do it, and they can't all be, you know, superhumans. So it was worth pursuing, and yeah, it was what I wanted to do, and I just found it absolutely fascinating that could happen, basically. Because when you're trying to get into somewhere, when you're on the outside of anything and you really want to get on the inside, part of you kind of wonders whether it's actually really going to happen. You know, that's when you really want something like that. That's just the way life is, isn't it? You just think, is this really going to happen? Is this? And then it does, and you just don't really care about the kind of negative parts of it. You just don't really care about them at all. It's all just really new and interesting and exciting, and yeah, it was great, and that's never really worn off. I mean, there's bits of any job that you can live without. We all have that. But at the same time, I've never lost sight of the fact that this was what I wanted to do. I chose to do this. Nobody made me do this. Nobody even asked me to do it. I decided to do it. I'd inflicted myself upon this industry. So, you know, you can't have too many complaints, I don't think. You know, it was my decision.
Well, was there ever a point when you were doing it and you thought, actually, on the flip side, I'm not going to make this isn't going to work? Or was there another time where you thought, oh my God, actually, I really know I'm breaking through here now?
There's plenty of both, and they don't always come in a kind of chronological order that you might expect, because loads of times where I thought, is this really going to work out? Because particularly the more worrying ones with them was when you've been doing it quite a long time and you knew that retraining for something else or going into something else, although doable, would be difficult, and a blow to your pride and morale and all the rest of it. You get to a stage where you just think, I'm almost past the point of no return with this now. This really, really does need to work out. So loads of that. Anyone who says they don't have situations like that is full of it. Everybody has situations like that. And yeah, you know, a few ones where I thought, yeah, I've made it, kind of thing, or I've made it to A level. And most of the time I was pretty much right, but every now and again you get to a level and then something happens that you're not expecting, and you're not there anymore. I remember the financial crash in 2008. I was just segueing from radio to TV, or starting to, and I picked up a couple of really good TV gigs. One presenting Arsenal TV, which was great because no one really watched it, to be honest. So you could kind of make mistakes, and you try not to, obviously, but just a really good place to learn. And the other one was doing some pitchside interviews on Channel 5 football. Again, similar kind of thing. I mean, a lot of people were watching it, but it was quite a small role, and everybody else was really experienced. And then so that was brilliant. I thought, oh, I'm absolutely flying. And then the stock market crashed, and 3 months, 4 months later, they both disappeared, and you're kind of back to where you were before and scratching your head. And then you just have to, put your shoulders to the wheel again. It's the hustle never ends with it, really. You get to points where you feel more comfortable because you know that you've got more people know who you are, and that finding work will be easier. But things change. Things change constantly. Just look at the last year. I mean, it's I wasn't expecting that.
When you left the as you said, Channel 5, etc., and when those things come to an end, was you out of employment, or did you have to go and find somewhere else to work?
So I was working at TalkSport still at that point. So what happened with me was that I sort of started at TalkSport in April 2000, and they were pretty good, actually. They took me off 20 quid a day quite quickly, and I went up to like 50 quid a shift, probably after like 2 or 3 months or something like that. And that doesn't really sound like a lot. It was like 50 quid was my day rate. But, you know, if I did like a production shift during the day, because everybody starts off doing everything, you know, I eventually have ended up doing what I'm doing now, but you have to do whatever you're told to begin with. And that's not only the right way to do it, but also the most advantageous way to do it, because you see everything and you get to kind of pick, if you like, which bit you think will suit you best, because it's not always what you think. I thought, well, I want to be on air, and that's what's happened. But I had other mates who thought they wanted to do that and then actually preferred production. So I did that, and I was on PAYE there. And although there were no guarantees of work and it was quite an unstable place, I was pretty solid there. Then I went self-employed towards the end of 2005 or early 2006. But I knew I was going to get a lot of work with TalkSport, which is why I did it, because I knew I wasn't really taking a gamble. And then you're just looking to add other things to your kind of, you know, your portfolio. So yeah, I mean, I was on to an absolute winner when those two arrived. And then of course they go, and it's not just the money, it's kind of the fact that they were, again, these are things you've been chasing for a long time, and you're really chuffed when you got them, and you haven't done anything wrong. Like that's good in a way, because, you know, it's not your fault, but it's also, that kind of thing's hard to take because it's not your fault. Something else has happened, but you just learn to roll with it after a while, to the point where you don't really think too much about it or get too worked up about it. You don't really have any choice in that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably reflective of life as well, isn't it? You know, if you're in a position actually and it's taken away from you through no fault of your own, actually, I think you've probably just got to dust yourself down, more so probably in the world of journalism, and just go again. So you fast forward a bit. How long is it before you start working at Sky?
So I started at Sky doing football. So I did 10 years of football pretty much, because TalkSport was football then. And I would get out and cover some boxing when I could, but they just weren't really that interested in it. Right at the very start when I was there, they were, but I did get to a couple of big fights as a runner. But that didn't last too long. I think they did a couple of Lennox Lewis fights, and then that was it really. But they spent an unbelievable amount of money early on TalkSport on rights, and then realised that they were going to go bankrupt, and so had to stop. Still fairly classic error really. So I started doing football first on Sky in 2010, which is commentating on Saturday 3:00 kickoffs. There used to be such a thing, and that would go out on Premier League productions as well. So that would go out for the world feed, as it's described, and that was a big gig to get. And I did that for a season, and then I tried my luck getting into the boxing department, because an old pal at TalkSport had moved, and he was in the boxing department, a guy called Dave Finch. Who was sort of very instrumental in my career, actually, with that recommendation. And yeah, I reached out to them, and they got me involved doing some boxing too. I carried on doing football at the same time, but I realised that I preferred the boxing, and that didn't really work with the football department, because I chose football over boxing a couple of times. I was hoping I could keep doing the two things, but it just doesn't really work like that. You're always going to end up having to choose one, because otherwise you'll just end up doing two okay. If you want to do one of them really well, you've got to choose one. So I chose boxing, and then I was doing Sky kind of on and off from about 2011 to about 2016, and went to work at loads of other places, pretty much everywhere that covered boxing, to be honest. Then 2016, I got kind of brought full-time onto the team, and I've been there since. I'm still freelance, so I can still do other things. I haven't really had time to do other things, but I mean, I do sometimes. Increasingly, it looks like I will be the next few months, just because the Sky schedule, as is everyone's, is lighter than it has been, for obvious reasons. And you know, if you can get out there and make money rather than sitting around the house, then you should do it, shouldn't you?
Yeah, no, definitely. So, how would you say that you found the transition of, you know, being part of a team that's actually flying post-COVID, pre-COVID, sorry, and then actually post-COVID, where we're at now? How does that differ, I suppose, around the production and actually capturing the boxing fight, as opposed to it was possibly 15, 16 months ago?
It's just not. It's much more solitary. It's just not as much fun. Fight nights I still really, really enjoy, but fight weeks are completely different because previously, you know, you go to the workouts on the Wednesday, press conference on the Thursday, weigh-in on the Friday. You'd be in different parts of the country, so you'd be with the team. You'd be kind of like eating together in the evening, and you know, you catch up with loads of people at fight weeks, managers, trainers, promoters, fixers. You know, it's just great fun to be around. Just brilliant. Like, it's just amazing traveling circus where there is literally never a dull moment, and all of a sudden there isn't that, because I've not been in any of the bubbles, and I'm sure the bubbles are like that to a degree, but also not, because there's not as many people and you are all hemmed in and on top of each other all the time. So it's just very different, and there's no crowds at fight night, so obviously that means it's not the same kind of atmosphere. That hasn't really affected me, so I haven't found that too bad, because I've done a lot of amateur competitions where there's no crowd, or you're commentating early in the night. If you commentate early in the night, there's no crowd, but you know there will be later. So it's kind of, that doesn't count as a sort of comparison. But the amateur competitions do, when you know you're in this big vast sports arena in Kazakhstan or whatever, and it's unbelievably high standard of boxing's happening, but you know that no one's really going to come and watch it on a Tuesday afternoon, and that's totally fair enough. So you get used to that. But I think it's just the sociable side of it more than anything else. You know, it's just, you just miss the people who are around it all the time, because they are great. You know, they're great value. And I think numbers wise, in terms of logistics, there aren't as many people there as there would be normally. So it's not staffed as sort of densely, if you like, as it would be normally. But pretty much back towards that, I think, by now. You know, it's been fine. You know, fight camp was very, very different and really interesting from that point of view. And the Wembley residency, again, same kind of thing. You just kind of, yeah, you're just not as busy. It's as simple as that. And that's been the same for everybody, hasn't it? Whatever they do, really.
I think as well, you know, and on reflection of that, actually how different boxing has been this year, it's actually allowed us, I suppose, to scrutinise some of the events and some of the fights that have taken place. And, you know, we've thrown up some absolute crackers these past 12 months of boxing events. Is there anything in particular, one of those fight nights, etc., or anything that really sticks out in your mind?
Well, fight camp was amazing, because to have that idea and then bring it to fruition was something else. I saw it. I think the first 2 weeks I wasn't there, and then the last 2 weeks I was. So the first 2 weeks I'd seen it on TV, and then when I went, it completely lived up to the hype. It just looked fantastic, and I just don't think that they could have done any better than that. I don't think anyone in the world did COVID sport better than Matchroom did, and Sky did for that particular sport. They might have done, but I didn't see it if they did, because the great thing about boxing is that you really can kind of put it anywhere. You've really just got to have enough room for that ring and a bit of space around it for the officials and the judges. That's not that much space. So people were talking about things like, oh, we could go and do it on an aircraft carrier, or we could go and do it on like a big barge in the middle of a river, and people would laugh, but you could, and people have. Like Don King did that on the aircraft carriers in the you know, with the United States Boxing Championship. And back in the bare knuckle days, they would have fights on barges on rivers, like between county lines. So, you know, nobody knew whose jurisdiction it was, so you can get arrested. Stuff like this has happened in boxing down the years, and you can do things like that. And they did. They used that imagination and put it in the back garden of what, you know, to the naked eye looks like a kind of stately home. So that'll take a lot of beating, actually. A lot of beating. Yeah, I went to do a card in Germany in mid-July, which seems mental now, because at that point we seemed to think that things were getting back towards normal. I remember being on the plane on the way back and it was full. Like half the people weren't wearing masks, you know, and it's just, I can't. Yeah, the more I look back on that, the stranger it gets. But that was an outdoor card, again in a venue they probably wouldn't have used otherwise, where the fighters did their ring walks over this little like bridge over a little lake, and it was half full, you know, 500 people, and you just look around something like that again and just think, this is great. Like we just wouldn't You know, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought? It's so much better than being just inside some kind of fairly stale aircraft hangar style arena, which you get a lot of in Germany for their fight nights. So yeah, I think they'll do fight camp again. From what I hear, they're going to do it again, June, July, August time. Just take it outside, maybe pack a few shows into a couple of weeks or whatever. You know, it was great.
I think it really drew on the British audience as well, when the public and as a fight fan at home sat there watching it. It was almost as mesmerizing to sit and actually see that happening around this massive house, but actually taking it back to basics of what you've just said there. It was in somebody's back garden. As long as you had enough room, as what you've mentioned, for the ring, the medical side, and the production team around it, then actually you were laughing. You could get away with that anywhere. And I think that really brought about something different, and it was innovative, in for the fact that people actually went with it. They've run with this idea and it's worked. And for the fact is, as you just mentioned there, that we're going to do it again.
Yeah, it just opens up all sorts of possibilities. I mean, the next time they do it, they'll be hoping anyway, they'll be able to keep the costs down a lot better, because they won't have to do a bubble. That'll be the hope. By July, August time, it'll just be like a normal. They won't have to spend the money on the testing and all the other stuff. And it does just make people think outside of the box and just be a bit more creative. And people don't really have a problem doing that in boxing anyway. But when they're then given kind of full range, carte blanche, to really think about how can we do this? How can we do this in these exceptionally strange circumstances? And then you come up with something like that. It was great. And I remember doing Dubois Joyce as well at the Church House in Westminster, and that was a great venue. Like okay, it's indoors, so it's not the same as fight camp, but it's winter by then, so you can't. I mean, they did think about extending fight camp for a bit, I know that, but then they realised we're getting into September then, and you can't really rely on the weather, and it was the right thing not to do it, and just finished with WHYTE MORE. But the Church House was brilliant. You've got this historic old building where all sorts of things have happened in the past, and statesmen have stood up and given speeches, and it's this round space, and the balcony was right on top of the ring and all the rest of it, and the space in the middle, the space on the ground floor was kind of perfectly housed a ring and a bit of other stuff for officials and TV. I mean, if that was kind of twice as big, that venue, when we got crowds back, they would 100% use it, because the atmosphere would be absolutely amazing. But yeah, it does say a lot that what they managed to do is something that they would actually think about doing again, because it just worked.
Do you think there's the ability that actually, when fans come back, and very much, we're talking along the lines of York Hall there, these type of venues actually where people really feel like they're watching over, or they're sat on top of the ring, that we may start seeing that more and more in boxing when fans return?
Yeah, I think everybody appreciates a packed out venue. I think more than anything else, that's what you want to see. You would rather see York Hall absolutely rammed out than the Copper Box half full. I would anyway. And I know promoters can't think like that, because tickets are tickets, and that's revenue. But it's just such a great look when you've got somewhere which is absolutely packed, and it's got that kind of atmosphere. And if you're a fan, and I go to fight nights, like buying a ticket quite a bit, that's what you want. You want that kind of that juice, that adrenaline off the fact that this is an event, and this is something that people really want to see, and the enthusiasm and the passion for it is there. Because if that's not there, then what have you got really? Because I struggle to watch football at the minute. I was quite into it when it first came back, because it had been away for a while. I love football. I spent a long time covering it, and it's great. But I think that is a sport that has really suffered from there being no supporters there. Because with boxing, I think a difference as well is that when you watch boxing on TV, of course you can see the crowd through the ring, but you don't really see the crowd, and they'll cut away to the crowd every now and again, but you're just watching the ring really. Whereas when you're watching football, you're very aware of the crowd. I am anyway, or I'm very aware that they're not there. Whereas with boxing, just less so somehow. I don't think it makes quite as much difference to the kind of TV experience of it. But I think they will look at venues, maybe some alternative venues for for boxing that they haven't thought about when it does return, and just scope them out and see if they might work. I mean, the Albert Hall is one. I think Frank Warren's, has he been back there since pre-pandemic? I think, yeah, he has been, hasn't he? That's an amazing venue. I mean, that is just unbelievable. And again, that's the beauty of boxing, is you can't take any other sport to the Albert Hall. You might get a tennis court in there, I suppose. I don't know if they've done that, but there are these places around where you just couldn't. You could put a ring, but you couldn't put anything else. And it's definitely worth thinking about it. It all comes down to cost, but you can make boxing a spectacle in a way that you can't with other sports.
I think, as we say, money will be the winner at the end of this. As much as we're talking about fans, etc., and everything else, at the end of the day, promoters have had to fork out a lot of money with reliance on second, third sector investment. And I suppose I would say that, fingers crossed, we get through to September unscathed. And actually we can start seeing fans that are going to start returning to arenas. And I generally do feel, and I know through my excitement, as I'm talking about it, actually not visioning it, that when we have fans that return to events, and essentially around boxing and football and things that you've mentioned there, that there's going to be this boom, that this real sonic wave boom, I think, is going to happen. And I think we're going to see some real high intense fights that are going to happen before this year's out, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I do too. It's been a big point of discussion, hasn't it, in just wider society? What's going to happen when people are allowed to go to things again? Will they be reluctant? Will they be fearful? I don't think so. Not the sporting crowd anyway. Not a chance. They will rush back. They won't be able to wait to get back, because I think by that point, I think the government has learned a lot of lessons throughout this whole period. And I think what is not going to happen now is that is going to be rushed. So that I think that when it does happen, people will have some confidence that most of the population has been inoculated, that the vaccine's been rolled out, and that they will be able to go without any fear of really contracting COVID. And they won't be able to get enough of it. They will not be able to get enough of it. And the fighters will feel it too, because they've got used, most of them, the ones who are normally on TV anyway, they've got used to not fighting in front of crowds. And it's amazing how quickly you can get used to something. I mean, life's very habitual, isn't it? You get used to things quick. I was talking to my wife the other day about, what's it going to be like the first time? Yeah, we were talking about it off air. I live near Westfield in Stratford. What's it going to be like the first time I go down to Westfield and it's rammed? It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel weird. I mean, I don't think I'll be fearful of it in any way, but it will feel odd. And for fighters, I think it will feel odd when all of a sudden they're back to that old ring walk where people are leaning over the barriers, trying to high five them, where they're back to, rows at ringside being spitting distance away, when you're just back to that just ridiculous noise level, and just the atmosphere that it brings, and the kind of raise in temperature that it brings, just everything about it. They'll feel that, because, and I think we may see a good few fights, like you say, where that gets to them, and their heads just go. Maybe fighters who we don't expect to see fight a certain way will all of a sudden surprise us. I think that could definitely happen.
I generally think so as well, and I think that there's the ability for these particular fights. Essentially, if we talk about if we're going to have a big fight where we're going to have two people that are known punchers, these could be really, really energetic events, because actually this whole time that it's happened, people have been involved in major sport, have almost been sort of blanketed. They've sort of been wrapped up in cotton wool, and it's been managed through no fault of their own, but actually in a very secure and closed environment. Whereas we say people have got used to there being no crowds, they've got used to it being very quiet, and they can actually hear their coach or trainer shouting to them from the corner of the ring. There's the potential that all of that is going to go, and it's going to get back to actually doing the basics of biting down on that gum shield and fighting through what's going to potentially be a tough fight. And I really do think that we're going to see some shocks before the year's out. I can't say what or who fighter it's going to be, but I definitely think there's going to be a real bustling form of entertainment that we're going to be exclusive to as well.
And another thing too is, I think that you look at the fights that we've got coming up and that we've had over the course of the last 6-9 months. I mean, the second half of last year was kind of a bit of a make do and mend. It was people were trying to figure out how it would work. Top Rank did great with the amount of stuff they managed to do in Vegas. Matchroom and BT did well over here with Matchroom and Frank Warren with BT and Sky did well over here and in other places as well. But look at the fights. Look at some of the fights we've got this year. You know, there's Frampton against Jamel Herring coming up. That's a great fight. Taylor against Ramirez has just been made. You know, unification, Grand Slam unification, that's still happening. We got Lomachenko Lopez last year, of course. That was another big fight. Joshua Fury is absolutely huge. It looks like that's not too far away. There's some really, really good fights that are in the pipeline, and some of which have already been made. And I do think one thing that is going to happen off the back of this is that there will be a greater sense that we really don't know what is going to happen. So when the opportunity to make a big fight is there, and there is enough will from both sides to make it happen, because without that, nothing ever happens, then you've got to do it. You've got to strike while the iron is hot and do it. Because the great thing about Taylor Ramirez and Joshua Fury isn't just that they're happening, but they are happening at exactly the right time. Like, that is the perfect time for Ramirez and Taylor to fight each other. Not just because they've got 2 belts each, but because they're undefeated. They've both done pretty much exactly the same thing in terms of opponents. They're meeting at the perfect time. It's not past its sell-by date. It's not undercooked. It's ideal. And it's exactly the same with Joshua against Fury. You know, people talked about Joshua against Wilder, and it should have happened. And now it's too late because, for obvious reasons. But Joshua Fury, forget the fact that Joshua's lost the fight. You know, everybody's obsessed with the O, and I understand that. You know, you can hype Taylor Ramirez to the ceiling because they're both undefeated, and that helps. But Joshua Fury again is just happening at exactly the right time. It just could not be better. And we'll get 2 of them this year as well. You know, it's bound to be a 2-fight deal. So I do think it's changed people's mindsets from that point of view. They realise that what happened with Joshua and Wilder, for example. I don't know whose fault it was. Could be both sides, could not, who knows, who cares now, it doesn't matter. But it was bad that didn't happen, because they were both champions for a long stretch at the same time as each other, undefeated, and they never boxed. And that was a real missed opportunity. And they just don't, if you're a promoter, you don't want that to happen again, because what has slipped through your fingers there is a massive, massive fight.
The irony of that, we've noted that as well, and we spoke about that again earlier, but also another fight that we haven't mentioned is Canelo, Billy Joe Saunders.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly. Any fight with him in at the minute, Canelo is a big fight. And people weren't wild about the fight against Yildirim, but if he boxed out the Yildirim on May the 8th, then I would have understood why people would have slagged it off, because, you know, why do you need to wait 5 months after you boxed Callum Smith to fight Anthony Yildirim? But he didn't do that. He boxed him 9 weeks afterwards. He's staying busy, and it's great, because you want the, and that's another thing that can maybe change, is that, and you need your top fighters to take the lead on this. Once we kind of come out of this, it's been very difficult to do it last year. So I'm not saying that everybody should have been fighting every 2 weeks last year. But if our big name fighters out the back of COVID can decide, you know what, this is a short career. Look at Josh Warrington. Like, he just, you know, he was in the perfect position, and then all of this happened, and losing to Maurizio Lara, you know, things like that can happen. But he was forced to take a 15-month breakout at the worst possible time. And people should look at things like that and think, oh, I better factor into my career plan another global pandemic. But, you know, that's a bit pessimistic. But it is a short career, and you do need to make hay while the sun shines. So when you get to that point where you are a top name fighter, why do you have to slow down to 2 fights a year? Like, people will say TV schedules, lead times for promotions, difficulties in negotiations. Fine, I understand all of that. But these are things that can be overcome. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Why not fight 3 times a year? Like, if you reckon you're at your physical peak between, say, 28 and 32, maybe. For boxing, it's probably more like 26 and 30, so long as you're not, you know, if you're a clean athlete. Why fight 8 times during that period when you could probably fight 12? You know, you've got to plot your way through a career, and there's no one size fits all for everybody. But it's something that I've never really understood, why you get to a certain level and all of a sudden it's, okay, yeah, twice a year.
And I think Canelo, you know, he's a prime evidence of that.
Yeah.
He's literally taking no time off. He's having a very short break in between those fights, and he's going straight from big fight to big fight to big fight. You know, there's the potential that if he carried on in the form in the way that he's fighting at the moment, that he could get out 5 times this year. You know, and for somebody of that stature and that name and that size, that's massive for the sport of boxing.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and it's exactly what you want. And people like to throw back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and say, "Oh, well, look how often those guys boxed." Well, they did box often, but if you're going to box often, then you are going to fight some Avni Yildirims. Muhammad Ali fought Avni Yildirims. Everybody did, because if you were going to box that often, it was inevitable that you were going to fight some guys who weren't the best, maybe. But you know, now we've got mandatories, and you know that's a whole other discussion. But if you get a mandatory put on you and you have to take it, and it's not a fight you really like, just get it out of the way, just get it done, which is exactly what he did. And historically, activity is good for fighters, because you look at, you know, I watched the Bruno Tyson documentary the other day, and you look at Tyson's career, and he won his first world title against Trevor Berbick in November 1986. And then he kind of completed the set against Spinks in June 88. And including those 2 fights, over that period of time, he had 8 fights, I think. And that's like in a 19-month window, during which time he's becoming undisputed champion and then lineal champion. So he's the biggest name in boxing by far. And he's boxing like once every 2.5 months. And it was only when he slowed down that the problem started. You know, I was doing something on Nassim Hamed the other day. So similar thing. He won his world title against Steve Robinson in '95 in what was his 5th fight of the year. Boxed 4 times in 1996 as a world champion. 1997 boxed 5 times. Final fight, Kevin Kelly, Madison Square Garden. Biggest fight of the year, biggest fight of his career up to that point. And again, same with him. It was when it slowed down that you could argue that the problems started. But one thing that people are generally not great at in boxing is learning from the mistakes of the past. It's quite remarkable how often people not only don't learn from them, but they just repeat them verbatim almost. But yeah, more activity would be great. And if someone like Canelo can lead the way, then all the better.
You know, you've raised quite an important point there, and we're talking about, and this leads on to another discussion. So if we go on the potential with the way that heavyweight boxing is carrying on at the moment, Joshua Fury potentially have this 2-fight deal, but at the moment, if they're only both getting out, or you know, in Joshua's case, once a year, is that possibly 2 fights, and then we'll see one of these fighters disappear off into the sunset?
That's possible. That's possible. I mean, I give everybody a pass for last year because, for obvious reasons, and people were thinking early on, weren't they, incorrectly, as it turned out, that we might get crowds back, so they wanted to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And as it turned out, Anthony boxed in December, and there were 1,000, but you know, there was just no capacity for most people to box more than once last year, financially and for all sorts of other reasons. But yeah, that could happen. That could happen with the heavyweight division. Those 2 fights, they're huge. So to take a year over those 2 is just right, I think. But whoever comes out the other side of that as the man, I think then they then need to be fighting quite regularly, because they'll have all the belts, or they might not. I mean, with the 2-fight deal, with the second one not being a unification, unless the first one is some kind of no contest or draw, it won't necessarily be for all the belts. But anyway, whoever comes out the right side of that 2-fight battle will be the undisputed, you know, number 1 and all the rest of it, and might look around the rest of the division and think, is there that much more out there for me? And either they retire or they kind of need to get busy, I think, really, and just knock a load of people off if they think that's the lie of the land. And like, you know, again, to go back to Canelo, that's what Canelo's doing. He thinks he's going to beat Saunders, and he thinks he's going to beat him comfortably, and he'll think that he'll beat Caleb Plant and he'll beat him comfortably, and that's how he thinks about it, and that's how everybody should think about it.
Do you think that Canelo beats Billy Joe Saunders?
I do. Yeah, I do. If the Saunders of 3 years ago, I would have given a decent chance against the Canelo of now, probably a 30-35% chance. But with 3 years of inactivity, I would give him a 10 or 15% chance now, because he is very skillful, and I do really like him. I really like watching him. I think I just think he's fantastic to watch because he does have all that ability, but I think physically he's not going to have that sharpness, that razor sharpness that he would need to beat someone like Canelo. And he may win some rounds early, boxing and moving, but Canelo will track him down, and I think stop him, to be honest. And there's a big groundswell of support for Saunders in that fight, and I understand why. But really, all I ever do is look at what has happened in real life and what has happened recently in real life. And Saunders is sensationally gifted, but you could argue he's had 2 really good performances in his entire career, Andy Lee and Lemieux. And Andy Lee was 2015, I think, and Lemieux was 2017. And in the last 4 years, 3.5 years, by the time he boxes Canelo, he's done absolutely nothing really. And American fans, it's always interesting to get the opposing viewpoint. We know Saunders, right? So we know how good he can be, how good potentially he could have been, because I think that ship has sailed now, because we've watched him for a long time and all the rest of it. If you're not from the United Kingdom, you would look at his record and think, what's everybody getting so excited about? Like, he beat Andy Lee, good fighter, Andy Lee. He beat Andy Lee, that's a good win. He beat David Lemieux, but let's not pretend that David Lemieux's Gennady Golovkin, but good win. He was away from home. Where's the rest? That's what they would and do say to you. And it's pretty difficult to argue against that, to be honest. Yeah, so I think that's a hell of a tall order. And people talk about, against Canelo, if it goes to the cards, you're never going to get it, so you've got to knock him out to win and all the rest of it. I think he's at that point now where to take him close on the cards is going to be a hell of an effort. I don't see anyone out there at the minute who can do that. I thought he did lose that first fight against Golovkin. I thought Golovkin deserved to get it, and I thought it was clear enough that I thought it was a bad decision. Second one could have gone either way. So there is evidence there that maybe is the case, but at the same time, I think he's got to a level now, Canelo, where I don't really expect anybody to get particularly close to him.
I think I'll put that down to, as a boxing fan, a brutal but an honest assessment at the same time. And I think you've echoed there what a lot of other people talk. I've seen lots of talk from America today. There seems to be this phrase that's being bandied around that people are club fighters. It's not a phrase that I heard so much more in the UK, but actually I've heard it a lot from America recently. That leads me on to the next fight, actually. And I feel like it's a little bit of a flip of what we've just spoke about there. Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams. Now, for me, Liam Williams has been in fantastic form. Actually, he's been quite active, more so than Billy Joe Saunders the last few years. I take nothing away, from Boo Boo. Actually, he's a fantastic fighter. He's got a lot of pedigree behind him. But I feel that Liam Williams has come on leaps and bounds since that Smith defeat. And actually, I think that he might be able to shock a few people. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think with Andrade, I cover most of his fights, and me and Matt Macklin sat down with him for a podcast when he was over for White Riva, so that was July 2019. And yeah, he was great. He was really good fun, and you could see that he was very, very focused, and that he knew his value and all those kinds of things. And he's a champion, and he was a really good amateur, and he. The unfortunate thing for him is that he's been calling everyone out, and nobody really wants to fight him because he doesn't bring all that much to the table, even though he's got a belt, because he's awkward and he's going to be a difficult night's work for anyone. That's the way you would describe him, definitely. He doesn't really bring that kind of name or box office appeal. And so the fighters above him, the kind of fellow champions, they just haven't really been interested in him. Now, for the same reason that they're not interested in him, he's not really interested in Liam Williams. He doesn't want to fight Liam Williams, and it's not because he's scared of Liam Williams or he thinks Liam Williams is going to beat him. It's just because if you're him, it's one of those. It's like this bloke is a good fighter. I can see that. Like he knows boxing. You know, he's been doing it his whole life. He'll know that Liam Williams is a good fighter, and he'll know that that's going to be a hard night. And he'll also know that no one's really going to be interested in it. Here we are, obviously, but in kind of global boxing terms, no one's really going to be interested in it. And it's kind of a no-win situation for him. So I can completely understand why he's never poured any fuel on that fire. But that's what he's got. And if he wants to hang on to that title and remain relevant, then he's absolutely got to win that fight. So all of a sudden, it's a huge fight for him. He is very good, Andrade. He is very good, very slick, and I probably still would make it. I would make him the favourite against Liam Williams, unless he's taken his eye off the ball. But I don't see it, because if he does and he loses, then his career is in the bin almost, as harsh as it sounds. Because when you're a fighter like that, if you can't get people to fight you when you've got a title, what are you going to do if you haven't? You know, you've got to get back to mandatory, because that's the only way anyone's ever going to give you a crack. No one's giving him a voluntary. It's just never going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely do think that it'll be a tall order for Liam Williams to get a victory. But I think in reference to, and I suppose what I was probably getting at is more that comment around being a club fighter. I think that he might show people, actually, especially though a lot of the guys across the pond that have been making these comments.
They love it over there, don't they? They do like to dismiss. You know, kind of any fighter who's not American sometimes, but particularly British fighters. Some of them do it quite tongue in cheek, other than do it born out of sheer ignorance. But they will. He will definitely be underestimated by the US boxing public, and he will probably be underestimated by a significant amount of the US media as well. And I think he will definitely show on the night that what he's about, and that he is that kind of level of fighter. It might kind of work to his advantage, even. You know, he might be able to use that as a good bit of motivation. It might mean that fight week, there's not really that much pressure on him. There's not really that many media demands on him. Not that much attention on him. You know, all of those things. It could kind of work for him. I hope it does. He's waited long enough. You know, it would be great to see him do it. It really would, because he had that loss against Liam Smith, which was a difficult. Well, 2 losses against Liam Smith, but the first one particularly would have been hard to shake off, I think. And he's managed to come back from that. And he just looks very solid and very dangerous at middleweight. I just think that Andrade will probably be a bit too slick for him.
Again, I think that's fair, an honest assessment. Again, and then we sort of entwine with somebody else that's coming in between that, Chris Eubank Jr. Where is Chris? You know, where does Chris fit into any of this sort of idea at the moment with all these other guys, from whether we're middleweight or super middleweight? Actually, where is Chris? There's lots of talk again about against Kell Brook. Personally, for me, that's not really a fight I'm interested in seeing. I don't think there's a lot of value in it. There's nothing realistically that's going to come from it. I would have been more interested in seeing Liam Williams versus Chris Eubank Jr. But again, I know Chris has been doing work with Roy Jones Jr. Out in Miami. So actually, is Chris still pitting himself up there with these elite fighters? I'm just unsure from where I'm sitting and where I'm looking, actually, how he breaks through and how he gets into one of these title opportunities. I just can't see it.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, he's right up there in the rankings with the WBA, isn't he? So the one they would be looking at most closely would be Rio Murata, who's the WBA middleweight champion. So that fight is the one that makes most sense, really, because they could try and force that. I think he is number 1 with the WBA, so they would need to get him made mandatory and then just force that fight. I think he could beat Murata, and that would, not a given by any stretch, but I think he could, and that would get him a belt. But they don't seem that interested in it. They seem more interested in getting him, you know, a real big name fight. And I'm just not entirely sure where they're going to find one. You know, I don't know whether they could make a fight with someone like Jamal Charlo or not, what the relationship is there, you know, with Sauerland and PBC and stuff like that. And PBC seems fairly impenetrable to me, to get them outside of that, fighting outside of that, unless they absolutely have to. I don't think often happens. I don't know what Chris is. I mean, he is with Sauerland. Maybe they could do some kind of deal there. Who knows? And there's Golovkin as well, and that would be great. But the Kell Brook rumor is strong, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, because I think he's maybe looking for one more big one, Kell Brook, and I think he's probably, even though it was resurrected a couple of months ago, the talk of it was, I think he's probably given up on the idea of boxing Amir Khan, and probably should, because were that to happen, it would definitely be at welterweight, and I don't think that really works for him. So maybe that would happen, Eubank against Brook. It's an all British fight, and you could definitely put it on pay-per-view. And you, with the names of those two, you could probably take that outdoors at a stadium. Not Wembley, but I mean, you could take that to like Kell Brook fought at Bramall Lane, that kind of size place. You could probably take it somewhere like that. So yeah, maybe that's the most likely. But Eubank surely has got to want to win a world title.
I always look at Chris Eubank Jr. And there's always what I call, and what seems to me from where I sit again, is that there was this pinnacle moment. Now, we had all of this hype. Was it 2016, 2017? The years are eluding me here. When he fought Gary O'Sullivan, Spike. You know, there was so much anticipation and build up around this fight, around at the press conference. Was he going to try and kiss him? Was he not? You know, and there was lots of other thematics that went into it. And the boxing, and he showed that night that actually he had levels to his game. He was sharp with the punches. He was spiteful. He was powerful. And he came out at the end of it, and he stood there and he called out and he said, "I want Gennady Golovkin. You know, I want Triple G. I'm coming from you. Everybody else is scared from you. I want to take this fight." And I sat back and I remember I was watching it with a few other friends, and we thought, we're going to get this. We're going to see this fight. And I generally at the time thought Chris Eubank Jr. would be able to do a number on him. You know, Triple G was in the prime of where he is, and that's no discredit to him, but he was literally at that point bulldozing everybody else that was going out and getting put in front of him. And he's still a fantastic fighter now. But at that point, and we touched on it earlier with Joshua and Fury, if they'd have fought together, those two guys at that time, I don't think anybody would have batted an eyelid and said, actually, you know, this is a good fight. Golovkin was at the top of his game. Chris Eubank Jr. was up and coming, and he was, you know, showing levels again to the side of him. But it never happened. It never materialized. And then we seem to have gone sort of on this long and winding path where it really went to nowhere. Now, I know Chris fought in the Super Series, went over, did a fantastic number again, or we mentioned Avni Yildirim. But again, it's just never really taken off for him. And I don't know whether that's down to self-value, self-worth, or whether there's more behind the scenes of that. I don't know.
Well, he's with him and his dad, he's always had a very keen sense of what he's worth. So they negotiate hard. And that fight against Golovkin was supposed to happen on the 10th of September in 2016. And negotiations broke down, and Kell Brook ended up taking it. It was pretty much done from what I understand from people I've spoken to. And then it just broke down around the negotiating table. I'm not exactly sure over what, but I'm not totally sure, if I remember rightly, that it was anything particularly major. It might have been like something as tangential or seemingly tangential as overseas TV rights or something like that. But then again, when something breaks down over something minor, what people will tell you is that that's an indicator that they don't really want the fight, that they're actually just kind of sabotaging it. I don't know what happened, but anyway, what I do know is that the fight didn't happen. And as you say, it was a shame, because I think he would have given a good account of himself in there, Eubank. I think he'd have got beaten, but I think he would have given a good account of himself in there. And he's just had the Groves defeat in the Super Series was a big setback for him, because obviously it's a world title fight, first of all. But at that point, there were quite a lot of people who were thinking that he was going to win that fight. he looked great against Yildirim, and there were quite a lot of people thinking that he was going to win that fight. He would have learned a lot from the defeat against Saunders, in which he did well, and it was bold taking it that early. But then against Groves gave it to him really a bit, in terms of a bit of a lesson. I mean, he didn't like, completely savage him, but by the end of the fight, he was a beaten man. He was cut, and he really didn't have any answers. And I think that would have been quite sobering for him. So the problem he's got is that the two times he stepped up to that kind of level against Saunders and against Groves, he's come up short both times. And no matter how confident you are, that's a fact. That happened. I think he can win a world title, but I think if he got that fight against Murata, if they, home advantage would be big for that kind of fight, I think he would probably beat him. But at the same time, he's kind of one of these fighters who he kind of comports himself, if you like a world champion, in the way that he negotiates hard and knows his own value and sees himself as a big name, but he isn't one yet. And I'm sure he desperately wants to be one. But it needs to happen fairly soon, I think, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think his career, no disrespect intended, is probably not a million miles away from coming to an end. And I think that there's possibly that mentality of actually, yes, we could get a title fight, but actually, do we want that final paycheck fight as to where we can cash out? And again, that's what it looks like from over here. But talking of stepping up, Dillian Whyte Povetkin, Dillian I don't think he needs any opportunity to step up. And I think this time again, I think he's going to take it. That said, Povetkin's durable. He shocked him. I think he shocked a lot of people last time. But I would like to think that on this occasion, Dillian gets him out there earlier.
Yeah, I think he'll win. I do think he'll win. I think I'm not entirely sure what I think is going to happen, because when you get knocked out like that, it is going to have an effect on you. I don't care who you are. And afterwards, I was in the bus with him on the way back to the Holiday Inn, actually, after the fight, him and his team. And I was with Johnny Nelson, and Johnny just turned around and said to me, "You okay?" And he just said, he was completely lucid. And he just said, "Yeah." He said, "Seriously, I'm absolutely fine." He says, "I made a mistake. I know how it happened. I just want the rematch as quick as I can now." And the original plan was it was going to be in quite early in December. So it was going to be, weeks afterwards. It was like 13, 14 weeks, something like that. So he's always been of that mindset right from the beginning that it was, he's never said it was a fluke or anything like that. He's never taken any credit away from Povetkin. He landed an amazing punch, but, he feels like it's a bump in the road that he can put behind him quite quickly. And I think he will win, but how he goes about it will be really interesting. He's got Harold Knight in his camp now, who Xavier Miller's still there too. We trained him for that last fight. But he's got Harold Knight, who spent all those years with Lennox, who knows all about heavyweights, and he knows all about bringing a heavyweight back from a knockout defeat, because he did it twice with Lewis. So I'll just be really intrigued to see how they go about that. You can't really afford to be too cautious in heavyweight boxing. But at the same time, you look at what Joshua did against Ruiz, he did what he needed to do, which was just keep it long, box on the outside and win on points. And you can never really believe too much what people say to you about what they're going to do, particularly if they say they're going to knock somebody out. They will do whatever they feel they need to win, particularly in the position that Dillian Whyte's in, where impressing doesn't matter. It just doesn't. He's just got to win and get that mandatory position back. And he can stick the joint out. It's not a problem. He's just got to win.
Yeah, and talking of positions where people are, and I know you was lucky enough actually to be attending the event a fortnight ago of Josh Kelly versus David Avanesian. That was a fantastic fight card again. We had Florian Marku versus Ryland Charlton. That was a great fight. I thought Ryland Charlton gave a good account of himself, but I think Florian Marku showed actually that he has got levels, to his game and his boxing. I thought he was very good with the jab. Actually, his ring craft was good. He moved very well. And I think that he lured Ryland into a difficult fight that actually I don't think Ryland could win. I know Ryland, his camp came out afterwards and saying that he was quite big, small, sorry, for the weight, and actually they'll take him down. So I know Florian called out Conor Benn. I don't quite think I can see that fight happening yet. I think that's something away. But moving on, to Josh and David, that was a fantastic spectacle. I'd have had many conversations with Carl Greaves, who'd more or less told me throughout the whole, weeks leading up to camp that David would get him out there after the 6th round. And I think he was quite surprised when he got him out of there during the 6th round. I think that shocked him as well. And I think that the manner in what it showed was that Josh came out, Josh started really fast, really sharp. He looked good on the punches. Movement was good. Movement was well, sorry. And then as the round seemed to progress, and I think, very early, Josh looked tired. He looked very tired very early. And I think that's where David seemed to kick on. And he got quite a brutal stoppage, I think, in the case. Where does Josh Kelly go from there? Does he come back or does he move up in weight?
It's a good question. That he did look like he was gassing quite early on, and the way that he kind of unravelled was pretty alarming. We'd seen him against Ray Robinson when he was up at halfway, definitely, maybe won the first 5 rounds in that fight, and then in the second half of the fight, the feet just slowed down completely, and all of a sudden he's in a different fight, and he ended up with a draw. And he admitted after that it was because he gassed in the second half of the fight. And I remember hearing him say that and thinking, it's not great, but you can do something about that. And then it happened again against Avanesian. The only thing I can think is that maybe he is too big for the weight. He did the weight well. He looked great on the scales. And they've made no excuses in the aftermath, none whatsoever. But if it isn't that, then there is a real problem there, because he just ran out of steam after about 4 rounds. And Avanesian had been catching him in those first 3 rounds, but with nothing, supersonic. He would have been happy with how those early rounds were going, Avanesian. You could hear Carl in the corner saying, good rounds, despite the fact that he would have lost the round, because he knew that Kelly was winning rounds, but they were coming at a cost. It was just, Adam Booth was so confident in him, and the team around him was so confident in him. And they must have been shocked by it too. I think it's quite a big job for Adam Booth to kind of nurse him back from that one. I think the move up in weight, he'll only do it if he feels like that was an explanation and a real factor. It's an intriguing scenario, that one. It really is. I mean, going into the fight, it was one of those fights where, like I said, I like to look at things that have actually happened in real life when it comes to like deciding someone's a favourite or an underdog. And you had to make Avanesian favourite for that fight because he's just operated at a much higher level. That doesn't mean that the person who's operated at a higher level and has been in deeper and has got more experience is always going to win, because you'll get people who could step up and make the step up and make it look easy, like Javonte Davis, fairly recently, or like Shakur Stevenson, or lads like that who, they might be 11-0 and haven't really boxed anyone, but when they need to take it up a level, you're just really confident they can. So it's not always going to be the case that the more experienced fighter wins, but you look at what they've both done up until that point, and you had to make Avanesian favourite. You just had to. And Carl Greaves' prediction on what would happen was absolutely bang on. I mean, he couldn't have got it more right if he'd. I think he had. Yeah, I think he had money on it, didn't he? That it was going to. He needed it to last into the 7th, and it didn't quite. I needed Yildirim to last just into the 4th the other day, and neither one mine. Frustrating.
I think we've had the luxury, as we say, we've sat here and we spoke about it. That actually boxing has continued, boxing has carried on. We've seen some fantastic fights. And I think we're probably going towards a bit of conclusion here, because I think it sounds like we're going to go backwards and forwards with boxing fight and boxing talk all night. Just before we do, I wanted to fire some questions at you, just get some quick fire answers, if you're happy to do that.
Yeah, sure.
Does Billy Joe Saunders retire if he loses to Canelo?
Yeah.
Does Josh Taylor defeat Ramirez?
Yeah.
Will Dillian Whyte knock out Alexander Povetkin?
No.
Will Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua fight before the end of 2021?
Yes.
And who takes the honours in that fight?
Fury first fight, second fight, don't know.
Do you think Fury can stop Joshua?
Yeah.
I like the answers, very honest, and I appreciate them.
I'm not entirely sure that anyone can stop anyone in heavyweights. They're good questions, those, because, you know, I was answering them thinking, oh, I'd love to explain, but, you know, yes or no. I like yes or no answers, because too much of the time, you know, people, it's like, oh, on the one hand this and on the other hand that, and you just think, no, come on, like, you know, no one's going to say you're an idiot if you turn out to be wrong, but I'm just asking you to actually tell me what you think is going to happen. I say no to the knockout for Dillian Whyte because I've just got a feeling that might end up being not quite what we expect, and he might just win on points.
No, definitely I agree that. I think how it finished and how it ended last time, and I think he may have something resonating in the back of his head there. Next time out, is it Akoli Glowacki?
Yeah, that's right. March the 20th. It's quite a big bill, actually. There's quite a lot of them now. Fowler's on it now, I think, because
Yes.
a fight fell out, so Fowler's been added to it. I think Ramla Ali's on it. I think there's quite
Yeah.
the cards are getting a bit bigger again as well. That's something I noticed from getting the cards through from Ed Robinson at Sky, because I get them early because I do the research for the team and stuff like that. And I think there's like 6 or 7 fights on that card. I think there's like 7 or 8 on the pay-per-view. So that's, in terms of the amount that we would broadcast, that's pretty much the same as it was before. Because before you had 10 fights and 3 wouldn't make Facebook or TV and the rest would. So we're kind of back to, yes, that's good. You know, it's kind of, you know, more people getting on the bill, more people getting a chance. I really want Akoli to win because I got to know him a little bit in the amateurs and I just really liked his attitude. I remember seeing him get stopped in the WSB finals in 2016. We were over in Uzbekistan in Tashkent. I had some amazing trips that year, and they got stopped by Erislandy Savon, who people who follow the amateurs will know, he was a really good fighter. And he got stopped again by him, actually, in the Olympics, as it turned out. And then when he turned pro, like he's always kind of said right from the start, he said, look, I just want big fights. I want to find out if I'm really any good or whether my amateur career was just a fluke. And for someone to be kind of open to that as a possibility, you know, he's just really, really, really sort of authentic, honest athlete. And he's been criticised quite heavily because a couple of his fights have been terrible to watch. But, you know, he's won, hasn't he? He's won them. And now here he is. And I think he will win. I think he will beat Glowacki, who's a good, solid fighter. But I think he'll do it. And it's just good to see someone who, like I say, has been quite heavily criticised, but he's never really seemed to take it that personally. He just goes about his business. Just goes about his business. For him to be the first one to do it from those Rio Olympians, and there's no guarantee that any of the others will. I think a couple probably might, but maybe not. You know, that'd be that'd be great. That'd be great. So it's a good card.
There's a good story to tell there, I think, behind Lawrence. You know, and I think possibly, I'm sure somebody will capture that up in the time of where he's gone, where he's come from, and where he's got to now. And as you say, I think it would have been, maybe not to the people that know, but a little bit of unexpectancy there that actually he could be the first individual from that Rio group of such a talented group of boxers that's going to win world title honours. So, you know, it could be fantastic if he does it. And if he does it in the fashion that he's predicting that he says he will, it's going to make for a fantastic night of boxing, and what a pinnacle to end the evening. Andy, I think I'm going to wrap that up now. I think I'm going to draw it in, as I say, because we're going to go on all night. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us. We'll have to do this again, but we'll make sure possibly it's not as long.
No problem. Enjoyed it.
And it's a pleasure. Thank you ever so much for this evening.